The wind howled across the icy plains of Virel, a frozen planet where snow never stopped falling. The white land stretched endlessly, and the sky above was gray like ashes. Snowflakes danced in the air, but this was no gentle snowfall. It was a blizzard, the kind that buried mountains and swallowed sound. In the middle of that storm walked a lonely figure. Her name was Mira, a Thari woman from a peaceful alien race that lived close to nature. Her skin was a soft pale blue, and her long dark robes were torn from the harsh wind. In her arms, she held her child, a small boy named Toma, wrapped tightly in a thin blanket. Mira's face was tired. Her large violet eyes blinked slowly, trying to stay open as snow stung her cheeks. Her hands were frozen and shaking, but she kept walking. Every step was heavy, like walking through deep water. The storm pushed against her body, and the cold bit into her bones. Just 2 nights ago, her home had collapsed. It was not the snow that destroyed it, but an earthquake. Virel didn't shake often, but when it did, it was cruel. The ground had cracked, the trees had fallen, and the small wooden shelter she had shared with her husband and son was now gone. Her husband, Laren, had died in that quake. He had run back into the house to grab the radio, hoping to call for help, but the roof fell before he could make it out. Mira had no time to mourn. She had grabbed Toma and ran into the woods, where the storm was already growing stronger. Now she was lost. There were no lights, no sounds except the wind. The village was far behind, and she didn't know the way to the human outpost people had spoken about in whispers. She had never needed to visit before, but now that outpost might be their only chance. Toma whimpered in her arms. His small body was shivering. Mira held him closer and gently sang an old Thari lullaby through her cracked lips. Stars above keep you warm, snow below keep you safe asleep, little one, while I am brave. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind, but it helped calm him for a moment. Her feet sank deep into the snow with each step. The storm was blinding. Mira could no longer tell where she was going. The trees looked like white ghosts. Every direction looked the same. She fell once, then again. Her knees hit hard ice, and she cried out, but no one could hear her. She tried to stand but slipped. Her legs were weak, and her arms were too tired to carry Toma much longer. Still, she didn't let him go. Mira looked around for shelter, anything. A cave, a rock, a fallen tree, something to block the wind. Her eyes burned from the cold. She blinked again and again, praying to see something. Finally, through the swirling snow, she saw a large fallen tree. It had been knocked down by the storm, and its roots stuck out of the ground like sharp claws. There was a small space beneath the trunk. Not much, but enough to crawl into. She moved toward it slowly, falling to her knees and crawling with her last strength. She slid under the tree and pressed her body against the trunk, shielding Toma from the wind. It wasn't warm, but it was better than open snow. Toma coughed weakly. His little hands were blue. Mira pulled the blanket tight around him. Her own fingers were almost frozen now, but she didn't care. Her only thought was her child. Her breathing was slow, her eyes heavy. She looked up at the sky, barely visible through the snow. Was this it? Was this where they would die? She had tried. She had done everything she could. But now, with no food, no fire, and no hope, she felt her heart breaking. I'm sorry, Toma, she whispered, her voice almost gone. I tried. But just as her vision started to fade, a strange light flickered in the distance. She blinked. The light moved. It was orange, steady, and floating. No, not floating. Walking. A figure was approaching. Mira thought she was dreaming. Maybe this was the end. Maybe her mind was making pictures. But the light came closer. It glowed through the snow like a star. Then, through the storm, she saw a tall shape, wrapped in thick clothing, a large coat, a helmet with lights on the sides. The figure was holding something long in one hand, a flare stick, burning bright. The shape dropped to one knee in front of her. A hand reached forward. She gasped as warmth touched her cheek. It was real. The voice was strange, but kind, not Thari, not her language, "Hold on," the voice said. "I've got you." It was a human. He gently pulled back the blanket to check. Toma then wrapped both of them in a thick, heated cover. She could feel warmth spreading already. She wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. Her lips were frozen. "Don't speak," the man said softly. "Just hang in there." He lifted Toma carefully and then helped Mira to her feet. She leaned against him, barely able to stand. Together, they walked toward the orange light. In the distance, Mira saw a dark shape, some kind of vehicle. A sled with blinking lights and a small engine. He helped them inside, closed the warm cover, and started the engine. As they sped away through the snow, Mira held Toma close. The child's breathing was stronger now, her eyes filled with tears, not from the cold, but from something else. Hope. She didn't know who the human was or why he had come. But he had found them, just in time. The snowmobile moved fast through the thick white storm. Inside, it was warm and quiet. Mira sat beside her child, wrapped in thick thermal blankets. Toma's breathing had become steady. His small fingers twitched as he rested on her lap. Her heart beat slowly now, but still heavy with fear and confusion. She looked at the human who drove the machine. He was silent, eyes focused on the snowy path ahead. His face was covered with a thick helmet, but his hands were gentle, steady. On the controls, the lights of the sled cut through the blizzard like two golden beams. After about 20 minutes, the machine slowed down. Through the swirling snow, a building appeared, small and boxy, made of metal and glass. A satellite dish on top turned slowly, and warm lights glowed from inside the windows. This was the human outpost. The man parked the vehicle and stepped out first. Then he returned, carefully lifting Toma in his arms while helping Mira walk. Her legs were weak, but she trusted him now. He had not spoken much, but his actions showed kindness. The door to the outpost opened with a soft hiss. Warm air rushed out, smelling like metal, plastic, and coffee. Mira had never been inside a human building before. It was strange, shiny. Walls, blinking lights, machines with buttons and screens. But it was safe, and it was warm. "Sit here," the man said gently, helping Mira into a soft chair near a heater. He placed Toma on a padded bed, then removed his helmet. Mira finally saw his face. He had short brown hair, a square jaw, and eyes that looked tired but kind. A scar ran along his left cheek, not deep, but old. He looked strong, but his voice was soft. "My name is Daniel," he said slowly, pointing to himself. "Daniel." Mira blinked, then pointed to herself. "Mira," she whispered, her voice weak. Daniel nodded and smiled. Then he pointed to the boy. "Name, Toma," she said softly. Placing her hand on her son's head, Daniel smiled again and gave a small nod of respect. He walked to a machine and pressed a few buttons. A round metal pod opened, letting out warm mist. He pulled out the steaming packets and handed them to her. Mira opened one and saw thick soup. "Strange, but smelling good." "Eat," Daniel said. "Good?" "Warm." She hesitated but took a small sip. It was salty, smooth, and filled her cold belly with heat. She offered some to Toma, who drank slowly in his sleep. Next, Daniel brought a box with blinking green lights. He gently placed a small scanner on Mira's forehead. It beeped once, then glowed blue. "Cold fever," he said quietly. "Low oxygen. Need rest." He opened a drawer and took out a soft gel cloth. He placed it over Mira's hands. Warmth spread through her fingers. Her eyes closed for a moment as relief washed over her. Daniel moved quickly but carefully. He checked Toma, wrapped him in a warming pad, and placed a small oxygen mask over the boy's face. Mira watched closely, worried, but Daniel gave her a calm look and a thumbs-up sign. She relaxed a little. Hours passed quietly. The storm outside roared against the walls, but inside, there was peace. Daniel sat near the control panel, typing reports and checking sensors. Mira sat beside her son, watching the human with silent curiosity. She had heard about humans before. Some said they were loud and proud, always ready to fight. Others said they were clever builders, full of machines and fire. But this one, Daniel, was different. He was quiet, alone, and kind. Late into the night, Daniel set up a soft sleeping mat for her and added more heat to the room. He handed her a blanket and pointed to the corner. Sleep, safe here, he said. Mira nodded. She lay down slowly, keeping one hand on Tama's back. She watched as Daniel turned off some lights and sat back in his chair, looking out the window into the snow. His face was thoughtful, a little sad. She wanted to ask him something. Why was he here, all alone in a frozen place? Did he have family? Did he ever feel cold inside like she did? But she could not speak his words, and her body was too tired. Instead, she whispered softly in her own tongue, "Thank you, stranger. May the stars bless you." The next morning, the storm was still strong, but Mira felt stronger. Her skin had color again, and Toma was awake, drinking warm broth from a bottle. Daniel had already cooked something that smelled like bread and fruit. He set it in front of her with a smile. She nodded in thanks, touching her chest gently. After breakfast, Daniel opened a small metal drawer and pulled out a flat screen. On it, he drew two figures, one tall, one small, walking in snow. Then he drew a building, and finally, a flying ship. He looked at Mira and pointed to her. Then he pointed to the screen. "You," he said. "From where?" Mira understood. She took the pen and drew a mountain, a tree, and a symbol of her village. Daniel stared at it for a moment, then nodded. He opened another screen and showed her a map. After a few clicks, a red light blinked near a mountain. "Here?" he asked. She smiled and pointed. "Yes." Daniel quickly began working on the radio panel. Sparks flew as he fixed broken wires and reset the power core. Finally, the screen lit up. He pressed a button. A small voice came through. "Hello, this is Thari Rescue Unit. Who's calling?" Daniel looked at Mira and smiled. Then he spoke clearly into the mic. "This is Human Outpost 7. We have a Thari woman and child here. They are safe but need pickup. Coordinates sent. Please respond." The radio crackled for a few seconds. Then a reply came. "Message received. Rescue team will arrive in 5 days. Route is damaged. Hold your position. Thank you, human." Mira heard the words and understood enough. Her eyes filled with tears again, not from pain, but from relief. She looked at Daniel. She didn't know how to say thank you in his language, but she reached across the table and gently took his hand. He looked surprised but didn't pull away. No more words were needed. The snow outside continued to fall, but the blizzard had grown a little quieter. The wind still pushed against the small outpost, but now there were short moments of peace between the gusts. Inside the metal shelter, warmth and calm had returned. Mira sat on the edge of the bed, watching her son sleep. Tama's breathing was stronger now. His skin had regained its pale blue glow, and his fingers no longer shook. She gently brushed his hair from his forehead and kissed him softly. She looked around the room again. The walls were made of metal, but not cold. Heaters buzzed quietly. Lights blinked on the machines. There were small tools, boxes of supplies, and even a potted plant with green leaves sitting near the window. She guessed Daniel had planted it for company. Daniel stood near the window, wearing a thick vest and holding a mug of something warm. He looked outside, but not with fear. His eyes were calm, thoughtful. Mira quietly walked over and stood beside him. The window was fogged, but she could still see a little outside, just snow, white hills, and distant trees. No other signs of life. She looked at Daniel's reflection in the glass. His face was quiet, his eyes far away. He looked like someone who had been waiting for something a long time. Daniel noticed her beside him and gave a small smile. "Storm's getting lighter," he said. "Good sign." Mira tilted her head, not understanding the words, but hearing the soft tone. Daniel took a marker and went to the screen on the wall. He drew a circle and a spiral, then tapped it. "Storm," he said, pointing outside. Then he drew a smaller spiral, weaker than the first, and made a thumbs-up sign. "Better now," he explained. Mira nodded slowly. She understood. Then she pointed to herself and then to Toma, touching her heart. She bowed her head slightly. A clear sign of thanks in Thari culture. Daniel placed his hand on his chest too. You're welcome. There was a quiet moment between them. No words, just the soft hum of machines and the gentle flicker of heat lamps. Then Mira moved toward the table and opened the small bag Daniel had given her earlier. Inside were clothes warm, soft, and clean. She had never worn human clothes before, but she recognized their purpose. She picked up a sweater and smiled at its softness. Daniel turned away, giving her privacy while she changed. When she finished, she looked at herself in the mirror on the wall. The human sweater was large on her, but warm. Her reflection looked different. Not like a weak survivor anymore, but someone healing, slowly becoming stronger again. Later that day, while Toma slept, Daniel brought out something that surprised her, a small box filled with toys. He placed it on the floor and opened it. Inside were small wooden figures, colored balls, a soft animal doll, and some kind of spinning ring. Mira's eyes widened. Daniel pointed at the box, then at Toma. For him? Mira gently picked up the soft animal. It looked like a small earth creature with long ears and smiled. When Toma woke, Daniel placed the toy beside him. The child blinked sleepily, touched the ears of the doll, and gave a tiny smile. It was the first smile Mira had seen on her son's face in many days. She felt her heart grow warm. Daniel knelt beside the bed and slowly showed Toma how to roll a ball across the floor. Toma watched, then reached out to try. The ball rolled, hit Daniel's boot, and bounced back. Toma laughed softly. Daniel laughed. Mira stood in the corner, watching the two. She saw something she hadn't seen since Laren died, a sense of joy. Not loud joy, but soft, quiet happiness, the kind that comes after great pain, after a while. Daniel walked to the small cooking machine and prepared food again. This time, he placed something extra on the plate, a sweet fruit bar. Mira took a bite and raised her eyebrows in surprise. It was sweet, chewy, and filled with flavor. Daniel smiled when he saw her reaction. First time, he asked. She nodded. Chewing slowly, they both chuckled. In the afternoon, Daniel took Mira outside for a few minutes. He gave her a thick coat and goggles. The wind had calmed. The snow still fell, but the storm was clearly ending. She stood there, taking deep breaths of cold air, but without the fear she had before. The world outside was white and wide, but she didn't feel alone in it anymore. Daniel pointed to the sky. Rescue coming. For days, he said. Mira counted on her fingers, trying to understand. He drew for small lines in the snow. For sleeps, he added. She nodded. It made sense. Back inside, Daniel showed her a small screen with blinking lights. It was a tracker. A green light showed their position. A red light was moving slowly toward them from far away. That's them, he said. Your people. She reached out and gently touched the screen. Her village, her people, her home. She looked at Daniel and saw something in his eyes, something quiet. He had saved her, cared for her, and now was helping her return. But there was also something else. Loneliness. She realized that Daniel lived here alone. No other humans, no other voices, only machines, snow, and silence. Why? That night, Mira sat with Toma while he slept and thought of her old life. The storm had taken her home, her mate, and her peace. But in return, it had brought her here to this strange, kind human. Maybe the storm had taken, but maybe it had also given. As the lights dimmed, Mira looked at Daniel and whispered softly in her own language, stranger. Thank you for finding us in the white. And in the silence that followed, she knew he had understood not the words, but the meaning in her voice. The snow continued to fall outside, but the wind was no longer screaming. The storm had lost its strength. Now the white flakes moved slowly, like soft feathers floating in the air. Inside the outpost, things felt calmer. It was quiet, but no longer lonely. Daniel sat at his workbench, checking power levels on a small screen. He adjusted a few wires and tapped the control panel. The outpost still had enough power to last weeks, but he needed to make sure everything Worked perfectly for Mira and Toma. He turned to look at them. Toma was playing on the floor with 2 small wooden blocks and the soft animal toy. He laughed when the toy tumbled over. Mira sat nearby, watching him with a smile. Her eyes looked brighter today. Her skin had more color. She looked like someone slowly coming back to life. Daniel smiled too, just a little. He walked over and gently placed a folded blanket beside them. Extra warm, he said, pointing at it. Mira touched the soft fabric and gave a small nod. She placed her hand on her chest and looked at him kindly. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling behind them. He sat across from her and pointed to himself. Daniel. Then he pointed to her. Mira. She nodded. He drew a heart shape in the air, then pointed to the child. Toma. Mira laughed softly. Yes, Toma. Daniel smiled wider. He then took a small board and began drawing simple pictures. A house, a tree, a star, a fire. Each time, Mira would say the Thari word, and Daniel would try to repeat it. His pronunciation was rough, but she laughed in a kind way, not to make fun of him but to encourage. Then she pointed to the pictures and said the words again. Heron for tree, Kesta for fire, and Zura for star. Daniel repeated them slowly. Hoprin Ksta, Zu, Ra. Mira nodded with a smile. Yes. Then he picked up the marker and drew a little figure with big ears and a small figure with a ball. He pointed to them. Mira and Toma, he said. Mira's eyes filled with emotion. She touched the drawing gently. It was simple, but it meant so much. No one had ever drawn her and Toma before. In this cold, lonely place, the picture felt warm, like sunlight. Suddenly, Toma sneezed. Mira picked him up quickly and wrapped him in the extra blanket. Daniel went to the heater and increased the warmth by a few degrees. Mira looked at him with worry. Daniel shook his head and smiled. He's okay, just cold air. She gave a small sigh of relief. Later that evening, Daniel brought out something Mira hadn't seen before, a small square screen with moving images. It was a holoplayer. He touched a few buttons, and a soft blue light appeared. A small animated figure danced on the screen. It was a human story, told without words about a lonely robot who found a lost bird and protected it through a storm. Mira watched quietly. Toma climbed into her lap and stared with wide eyes. By the end of the short film, the robot had built a nest for the bird, and both were smiling under a new sun. Daniel looked at Mira, wondering if she had understood. She looked back at him and said, Robot, kind, like you. Daniel chuckled. I'm not that good. Mira tilted her head. You saved us. Her voice was soft but full of truth. Daniel didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. The next morning, the radio beeped. Daniel walked over and listened carefully. A voice came through, faint but clear. This is Thari rescue ship. Delay confirmed. Ice storm broke path. Estimated time, 3 more days. Stay safe. We are coming. Daniel responded. Copy that. They are safe. Outpost strong. He turned to Mira and held up 3 fingers. Then he drew a picture of the airship and pointed to the calendar. She understood. 3 more days. She nodded slowly. Waiting was hard, but now she knew someone was coming. That afternoon, Daniel worked on a small solar panel. Mira watched him. With interest, he noticed and handed her a tool. She looked at it, unsure. He showed her how to hold it, then guided her hand to a bolt. With his help, she tightened it. Her eyes lit up. I helped. Daniel laughed. Yes, you did. From that moment, she started helping him more, passing tools, holding wires, even pressing buttons when he told her which ones. They didn't share the same language, but they understood each other now in a different way, through action, through kindness, through trust. Later that night, after Toma had fallen asleep, Mira and Daniel sat near the window. The snow was light outside, and a few stars could be seen through the clouds. Mira pointed at one of the stars. Zura, she said. Daniel nodded. Star. Then she pointed to another. Myron, home star. Daniel followed her finger and smiled. Beautiful. She looked at him and asked, You're home. He paused, then pointed up. Earth, very far. Mira touched her heart. Do you miss it? Daniel looked at the stars, then at her. Sometimes, he said, but sometimes, it's okay here. She smiled gently, understanding the feeling. The wind outside blew softly. The outpost felt like a small island in a sea of snow, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. Two souls from different worlds had found each other not through words, but through simple acts of care. And in that frozen place, something warm had begun to grow. Trust. Morning arrived quietly on the frozen land of Virel. The sky was still gray, but the wind was softer now. The blizzard had finally calmed. The snow no longer came down in heavy waves. It floated gently, like feathers in the air. Inside the outpost, Daniel was already awake. He stood near the radio console, checking signals. The blinking red light had turned green. The signal was strong now. He smiled. Today, he would try to send a full message to the Thari city again. Mira stepped out from the side room where she had been resting. She carried Toma in her arms. The child was healthy again, full of energy. He reached for a wooden toy that Daniel had left on the table and giggled as he held it. Daniel turned to Mira and smiled. Signals clear today. Time to call your people. Mira tilted her head, not fully understanding the words, but she noticed the excitement in his voice. Daniel pointed to the radio and drew a picture of a flying ship. Then he pointed to her and to the child. To come here, pick you up. Her eyes widened with hope. She stepped closer and watched him work. Daniel adjusted the large dish on the roof using a control panel. He typed in coordinates, adjusted the frequency, and pressed a red button. The machine beeped 3 times. Then a crackling sound came through the speakers. A voice spoke in the Thari language. This is Thari Central Station. Identify. Mira gasped and stepped forward. Her voice shook as she answered. This is Mira. From the snow plains, my son and I are safe. A human helped us. We are at an outpost. I can send the location. Daniel handed her a small screen where she drew a rough map of the mountains and the nearby river. He scanned it into the system and pressed send. There was silence for a few seconds. Then the voice returned. Coordinates received. You are far north. We will come. But pots are broken. We need 3 days. Mira placed her hand on her mouth. She nodded even though no one could see her. 3 days. We'll wait. Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder. They're coming, he said. Mira looked at him with wet eyes. Yes, thanks to you. Daniel stepped back, trying to act calm, but he felt a warmth in his chest. He didn't rescue people often. In fact, he didn't see many people at all. He had come to this place to be alone. But now, he wasn't. That afternoon, Daniel took Mira and Toma outside for a short walk. The wind was light, and the sun peeked through the clouds. For the first time in days, the sky had a hint of blue. Toma ran ahead, laughing, making tiny footprints in the snow. Mira followed slowly, smiling as the cold air touched her face. She no longer feared it. The cold was still there, but she was stronger now. She looked at Daniel, walking beside her, with his hands in his coat pockets. Do you live here alone? She asked gently. Daniel didn't understand all her words, but he knew what she was asking. He nodded. Yes, alone. Why? She asked. He paused for a long moment, then pointed to the mountains. To loud about there, Mira thought. About that, she had also lived far from big cities. Her people believed in quiet living, close to nature. But even in silence, being alone too long could make the heart cold. Daniel bent down and picked up a piece of smooth ice. He held it up to the light. It sparkled with many colors. He handed it to Mira. Pretty, like crystal. She smiled and looked through it. It shines, even in snow. They continued walking until the outpost was just a small dot behind them. Daniel stopped and looked around. He seemed to be thinking. Then he pulled a small object from his pocket. It was an old photo, slightly worn. Mira leaned in and saw a picture of a young woman with a bright smile standing beside Daniel. She looked like someone who had once meant a lot to him. Daniel stared at the photo for a while, then slowly placed it back in his coat. Mira said nothing, but she placed her hand gently over his. No words were needed. Sometimes silence could carry more meaning than speech. Back at the outpost, Daniel showed Mira something new, a small drawing screen. He drew two houses, one big, one small. Then he pointed to the big house. Your village, he asked. Mira nodded. He then pointed to the small house and to himself. My place. She looked at both pictures for a while, then smiled. She took the pen and drew a path connecting them, a simple line. Then she pointed to both houses and placed her finger on her heart. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled too. That night, after dinner, they all sat together under the window. Stars were shining outside, bright and clear. Thomas slept beside them, his small chest rising and falling gently. Mira looked up at the stars. Zura, Myron, Laura's. Daniel listened as she named each star in her language. She pointed and whispered softly. Then she looked at him and asked, Do humans have star names too? Daniel nodded. Yes, that one is Polaris. That's Sirius. That's Orion's belt. Mira repeated the names slowly. Polaris, Sirius, Orion. Daniel chuckled. Good, you speak well. She gave a soft smile. You too. There was quiet again. But this time, it was not empty. It was peaceful. The message had been sent. Help was on the way. The worst was behind them. And in this quiet little place, trust had turned into something even warmer, a feeling of connection. The sun was rising slowly on the 6th day. It cast a pale orange glow over the snowy land of Virel. The storm was gone now. The trees stood tall again. The white hills sparkled under the soft light, and the sky was clear for the first time. In weeks. Inside the outpost, Daniel was packing supplies. He checked the food storage, tightened the seals on the heater vents, and folded extra blankets. He was quiet, but his heart was not. Today was the day Mira and Toma would leave. Mira helped him silently. She carefully folded the blanket they had used on the first night. She picked up Toma's toys and placed them in a small cloth bag. Toma sat on the bed, swinging his legs and looking at the window every few seconds. He knew something special was coming. The radio beeped once then. Again, Daniel rushed to the console and answered. A clear voice came through. Thari rescue ship arriving. 2 kilometers east. Prepare for pickup. Mira's hand stopped moving. She looked at Daniel with wide eyes. He nodded gently. They're close. Toma jumped up with excitement. Mama, ship is coming. Daniel grabbed his coat, pulled out 2 extra thermal suits, and handed them to Mira. She helped Toma wear his first, then slipped hers on. Daniel led them outside into the cold morning air. The snow crunched under their boots as they walked toward the hill. Then they saw it. A Thari rescue ship flew low over the mountains, its silver body shining under the sunlight. It was shaped like a large wing, smooth and silent. The engines glowed blue as it slowly descended to a flat spot nearby. Mira's eyes filled with tears. It was real. They had come. The ship landed gently. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, and Thari rescue workers stepped out. They wore white suits with blue marks, and their eyes were kind. Mira. One of them called out. Running toward her, she dropped to her knees and hugged Toma tightly as the rescuers reached them. One of them wrapped Mira in a thick rescue cloak. The other lifted Toma and checked his temperature. They both smiled. You are safe now. The older rescuer said gently, We received your message. We are sorry it took so long. Mira stood and looked back at Daniel. He had taken a step back, giving them space. He smiled faintly, his hands in his coat pockets. The rescuers noticed him and paused. Is he the human who helped you? One asked Mira. She nodded. Yes, he saved us. Without him, we would be gone. They turned to Daniel and gave a respectful bow. Thank you, the older one said in English. You did a great thing. Daniel nodded, slightly embarrassed. Just did what anyone would do. But the rescuer shook his head. Not everyone would. You gave hope when there was none. The team guided Mira and Toma into the ship. Before entering, Mira turned around. She walked up to Daniel and held something in her hand, a small silver pendant, shaped like a leaf, with smooth carvings on the surface. My husband gave this to me, she said softly. It is the last thing I have from him. Daniel raised his hand. You should keep it. Mira shook her head and gently placed it in his palm. Now it is part of my story, and yours. Daniel held it carefully. It was light but filled with meaning. Toma ran to him and hugged his leg. Thank you, Daniel, he said with a wide smile. Daniel smiled and patted his head. Be strong, little one. Mira's eyes shone as she looked at him one last time. You found us in the snow and gave us warmth. I will never forget. Daniel nodded slowly. Neither will I. She stepped back, and the hatch of the ship closed behind her. The engines glowed again, and slowly. The Thari rescue ship rose into the sky. Snow blew across the ground as the ship lifted higher and higher, until it disappeared into the clouds. Daniel stood there for a long time, staring at the empty sky. The wind blew gently around him, but he didn't feel cold. He looked at the pendant in his hand and closed his fingers around it. For a long time, he had lived alone by choice. He had come to this frozen place to escape noise, pain, and memories. But now, there was a new memory, a good one that reminded him that even in a cold world, warmth could still be found. That evening, Daniel returned to the outpost. It felt different now, quieter again, but not empty. He walked to the table where Mira had sat, and where Toma had played with the toy. He placed the silver pendant on the table, beside the wooden blocks. Then he sat down and stared at the quiet radio. He turned it on and listened, not to call for help, but just to feel connected. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and slow, and inside, a human who once thought he had nothing left now carried something more powerful than he ever expected. A story of rescue, kindness, and quiet friendship across the worlds. The snow still fell, but the winds had softened. The mountains stood silent once more. Deep in the white land, Daniel lived quietly in his small outpost, just as before. But something had changed inside him. He was no longer just a man hiding from the world. Now, he was a man who had helped someone survive it. Each morning, Daniel made his tea and sat by the window, looking out over the frozen hills. He no longer felt the heavy silence that used to sit on his shoulders, in place of loneliness. He now had memories, warm ones. He often glanced at the table near the wall where the silver pendant lay. He hadn't touched it since Mira gave it to him, but he looked at it every day. It reminded him that he had made a difference, that even in the middle of a snowstorm, he had brought light to someone's darkest hour. One afternoon, while Daniel was repairing a power cable outside the outpost, the radio inside began to beep. He didn't hear it at first. The soft beeping continued. When he came back in, brushing snow off his coat, he noticed the blinking green light. Curious, he walked over and pressed the button. A calm voice spoke, this time clear and familiar. This is Mira, calling Outpost 7. Daniel froze. He hadn't expected to hear her voice again. If you can hear this, I wanted you to know we are safe. We reached our city 2 days after the rescue. Toma is healthy and smiling again. The elders welcomed us. We live with my sister now. Daniel slowly sat down, his eyes fixed on the radio. I told them everything. You did. The council thanks you. They say that your kindness has shown that humans and Thari can walk the same path. There was a pause. Then her voice returned, a little softer. Toma asks about you every day. He plays with the wooden toy you gave him and says he will be strong like you one day. Daniel smiled. I am learning more of your language. One day, I hope I can speak to you in your words, just as you tried to learn mine. If you ever come to the city, we will be waiting. With respect and care, Mira. The message ended. Daniel sat back in his chair. For a long time, he said nothing. The outpost was quiet again, but the silence was full of warmth. He looked at the pendant again and gently picked it up. Later that day, Daniel walked outside with a notebook. He climbed a small hill near the outpost and stood where the rescue ship had once landed. The snow was thin there, and the sky above was clear. He opened the notebook and began to write. Weeks later, in the Thari Citide, sky over the Thari city was bright with stars. Their towers were shaped like trees and mountains, blending into the land. Soft lights glowed along the walkways. Thari children laughed and played in the gardens under the moon. Mira stood on a wooden balcony, watching the stars. Toma played. Nearby with other children, he laughed as he spun in circles, holding the same soft animal toy Daniel had given him. Mira looked up at the sky and wondered if Daniel was watching the same stars. She missed the quiet mornings in the outpost, the sound of the kettle boiling, and Daniel's soft voice trying to pronounce her words. Her sister, Lyra, stepped onto the balcony. "He sent something," she said, handing Mira a small package. Mira opened it carefully. Inside was a notebook, simple, old, but full of writing. On the first page was a drawing of a tree and a small house beneath it. Mira smiled. She sat down and began to read. Back on Veroldenhill stood beside the outpost, watching a new communication dish turn toward the east. He had repaired it after many weeks of work. Now, it could send messages far beyond the hills. He had also planted something small in the snowy tree seed Mira had once told him about. A gift from the Thari. He wasn't sure if it would grow in this cold land, but he planted it anyway. Maybe it would take root. Maybe one day it would bloom. Just like the bond between them. Epilogue. A letter written. A story remembered. Dear Mira, I'm not a man of many words, but when you and your son came into my life, I learned that even in a world full of snow and silence, one small light can make all the difference. You brought that light with you. Even while you were weak, you showed strength, even in the storm. You protected your child with every breath. You taught me something I had forgotten, that we are not meant to live alone. I may never leave this place, but your voice, your kindness, and your courage, those things live here now, in this small outpost, where once there was only wind. If the stars are kind, perhaps our paths will cross again. Until then, stay warm, stay strong. Daniel. And so, across stars and snow, between a quiet man and a brave woman from another world, a story was written not in books, but in hearts, a human and an alien, brought together by a storm, forever connected by a moment of kindness. HFY. Humanity. At its best,